Chapter 11. Laura looked for Beth all afternoon. She looked for her at dinner, and when she went up to her room, she felt lethargic and sad. Emily came up at 7 and found her sitting in the butterfly chair, staring at a book. Emily saw that Laura was worried, and she thought she knew why. Laura had a crush on Charlie, and so Emmy hesitated to say anything. She just waited until Laura couldn't stand it any longer and said, "Laura, do you know where Beth is?" "Well, she was out with Charlie this afternoon." Laura looked so unhappy that Emmy pulled the desk chair over to the butterfly and sat down. "It didn't mean a thing, Laura, really. She'll tell you that herself when she gets in." "Is she still with him? You mean she's been with him all this time?" "Well, They dropped down to Maxie's to hear the music this afternoon." Emmy watched sympathetically as Laura's face fell. "Charlie was there earlier, Laura, before he met Beth. He loves jazz, you know. I guess he just decided to bring Beth along. They really were good this afternoon." Laura's face was pale and hard. She said nothing. "Beth likes jazz too, you know," Emmy added, afraid of the silence. "Yes, I know." "Laura, you mustn't take it so hard." Emmy reached out and put a hand on Laura's shoulder, but Laura shook it off, and her nails pressed cruelly into her brow and scalp, trying to cut out the hurt they could never touch. Emmy sat beside her in silence, miserable because she couldn't help. "Laura," she said. Her voice was all she could offer. Laura couldn't very well stop her ears. "Laura, please don't cry. She'll be home in a little while. She'll explain it to you. I know she will. Laura—" There, Laura, honey, please don't." Laura stood up, suddenly furious, and turned on Emily. "Don't call me honey. Don't call me that. I hate that word. Emmy, do you hear me?" "Yes, I hear," said Emily in a whisper. Laura sank back to the chair, frightened with her temper, her hurt, her jealousy. "Emmy," she said, "I'm sorry. You mustn't pay any attention to me. I didn't know you liked him that much, Laura." Oh, I don't. I mean, not really. Oh, I don't know what I mean. I can't explain. Please, Emmy." They sat in silence for a minute, and then Emmy said, "Maybe you'd like to be alone for a little while." Laura didn't answer. She was thankful, but too eager to be rid of Emily for graceful gratitude. When Emmy left, she sat perfectly still with her lips tight and her eyes full, and had a talk with herself. She began to see that for all her tolerant teasing and tenderness, Beth simply didn't like her jealousy, and she knew Beth would expect a vindictive temper and tears and recriminations when she got home. Laura faced facts. Her good sense was born of desperation. She couldn't swear off her jealousy, but she could tuck it under her love and hope it would smother. If it persisted, at least it wouldn't show. After all, maybe Charlie wouldn't last. Maybe it didn't mean anything. The door opened suddenly and startled a gasp from Laura. She looked up quickly, but it was Mary Lou. The letdown knocked her temper off again. "Where's Beth?" "Not home yet," Laura said testily. "Not home yet?" Mary Lou repeated in surprise. "Try again at closing hours," said Laura. She stood up and turned her back on Mary Lou, gazing at the desktop as if she had important business with it. Mary Lou stared at her back for a minute. The voice didn't sound like Laura's. "Will you tell her I dropped in? I'd like to talk to her when she gets back." "Certainly." "Thanks." Mary Lou waited just a second longer for Laura to say, "You're welcome," Laura never passed up a chance to be polite, but this time she remained silent, and finally Mary Lou turned and left, surprised. Emily came back to study, and Laura waited with her heart beating high for the closing hour chime and Beth's return. At closing hour, Charlie and Beth said goodnight in his car. They couldn't let go of each other with any finality. Beth murmured several times, "I have to go in," and neither of them moved except closer together. Charlie kissed her, a long, deep kiss. In the pale radiance of the dashboard, they gazed at each other. "Oh, Beth, darling," he said, "I could look at you like this forever." It was unoriginally and beautifully true. I never met a girl I wanted so much. So much. He frowned at the mystery of it. "I can't let you go, Beth. I can't let you go. Charlie." She traced the line of his brows with a finger and closed her eyes and felt his lips, and his warm breath flowed over her hand. He bent his head to kiss her hand, and she pulled him closer and licked his ear until he began to groan with the pleasure of it. "Oh, Beth, where the hell did you come from? Why didn't I know you when I saw you? I've been looking for you for so long, darling." "This is crazy, Charlie. It's just crazy," she whispered. "It happened so fast." He stroked her hair. "Are you sorry, Beth?" Her eyes fell. I don't know, Charlie." She looked up at him, and the sight of him scattered her doubts. "No, I'm not sorry." But when she looked away again, she was. "Yes, I am. Oh, damn, I don't know." He pulled her tighter. "Beth, Charlie, what time is it?" she asked suddenly. Laura was waiting. She went cold at the thought. 28 after. "I have to go in." "Oh, Laura, forgive me." "Beth, darling, listen to me. Wait, I have to go in." "I want to see you tomorrow," he said. "What time, honey?" "I don't know. Call me." She opened the car door, looking back at Charlie as she did so. He was frowning at her. "Call you? Hell, what's the matter with you? Tell me now." She got out of the car and slammed the door, hurrying up on the walk in the direction of the house. Laura was suddenly looming in her thoughts, and her conscience began to torture her. Charlie reached her side and took her arm and swung her about to a stop. "Charlie, it's late. I know it's late, Beth. What the hell's come over you all of a sudden? Wasn't everything all right?" His voice became soft, pleading. "Yes, oh yes, everything was wonderful, only what?" "Nothing. I just don't want to be late. Please, Charlie." She tried to shake his arm off, but he held her fast. Her concern for Laura chafed and grew with each second that he held her there, and at the same time she wanted to spend the whole night with him. She was helpless, rent between two loves, tormented. At last he turned and started walking with her toward the house. "When will I see you, Beth?" He sounded a little grim. "Just call me, Charlie, please. I don't know." "What's the matter? What in God's name is the matter? 2 minutes ago you were happy. Now all of a sudden you panic because you're going to be a minute late. Am I supposed to swallow that?" "You'll have to," she said. Her affection for Laura was crushing her with reproval. Charlie spun her around again at the front door and embraced her. "Beth, talk to me," he said urgently. She shook her head and tried to pull free. "Is it me?" he said. "Oh, no. Oh, Charlie, darling." She reached for him, and he kissed her and let her go slowly. She shook her head at him wordlessly, wondering why she couldn't hide her troubles. They were so strong, so near the surface, that they threatened to spill over. "I'll call you," he said finally, when the house mother called to Beth to come in. They stared at each other for just a second more, and then Beth left him. She ran up the stairs, pausing for an instant on the landing to wipe off her smeared lipstick, and then she went down the hall to the room. Her roommates were studying quietly together. She glanced swiftly from one to the other. "Well," said Emmy with a big smile, "welcome home." Then she thought of Laura and fell suddenly silent. Laura said nothing, and seeing her, so slender and wan in the big chair, Beth ached to be alone with her, to explain things. She began uneasily to undress. "Have a nice time?" said Laura. "Yes," she said cautiously. "Where did you go?" Beth was afraid to set off the volcano with every word. She went carefully. "Maxie," she said, "and then it got too late to come home for dinner, so we went out." "Well, I'm glad you're home safe," said Emmy. She left Beth and Laura alone. She understood that Beth would want to talk to the younger girl, and she made a discreet disappearance. Beth hung up her clothes, feeling as if she might explode with the tension. Charlie was so close, so warm in her head and the pit of her stomach, and yet there was Laura right beside her, real and hurt. She couldn't let her go to bed before she had explained, or tried to explain, at least some of what happened. It hurt her sharply to know that she had to lie. Laura sat hunched on the desk chair, her eyes fastened on the floor. Beth felt an unbearable pity for her and an almost exasperating scorn for herself. She stood gazing at Laura for a minute, unable to talk, to find the right words. Finally she went over to her and knelt on the floor beside her. She took her hands and looked earnestly up at her. "Laura," she said, "Laura, look at me." There was a film of anxiety over every word, a profound tenderness in her voice that touched Laura. She looked up and Beth reached for her to kiss her, but she resisted. "Mary Lou wants to see you," Laura said unexpectedly. "Oh, honey, not now, not now. You'd better go, Beth. She might come looking for you." "Laura, I don't want to leave you. I want to talk to you. You'd better go." Beth was surprised at her firmness. She squeezed Laura's hands and then lifted them up impulsively and kissed them. "I'll be right back." She hurried to Mary Lou's room and found her still up. It would never have occurred to Mary Lou to question anything Beth did. Emmy's most casual behavior was subject to suspicion, but Beth's most suspicious behavior was just casual. To Mary Lou, anyway. She trusted her. "Oh, hi," she said. "I was just going down to your room. Guess what?" Beth was in no mood for games. She tried to smile a little. "What?" "Mitch Grogan called me." It stirred a little interest. "Oh, that's great. Going to see him?" "Yes, this weekend. Say, Beth, is Laura all right?" That rang the alarm bell. "Yes. Why?" "She just seemed upset. About your date, I guess." "Oh, no, I guess she still likes Charlie." "Oh," she rubbed a distraught hand through her hair. "It was an out. Not the best, but the only one. Yes, God, I feel terrible about it. I understand," said Mary Lou. "Actually," she added confidentially, and confidence with her was a luxury, just as friends were a luxury. "I'm sort of glad it happened. You need somebody, Beth. I've thought that for a long time. It's a shame about Laura, but she'll find somebody." Beth had to get back. Her nervousness was likely to betray her. "I'm going to talk to her about it," she said. "I think it'll be all right." She turned and almost ran back to the room. Laura was waiting for her on the couch. Beth went over to her, sat down and searched her face, and then took her in her arms and held her for a long time. Laura submitted docilely, letting Beth cradle and comfort her. As for Beth, every part of Laura that she could see and feel tore her heart. The quiet acceptance was harder for her than an out-and-out tantrum would have been. She touched Laura's face with her hand and felt her wet cheeks and said in a broken voice, "Oh, Laura, honey." It was all she could say for a minute. Beth, that's all right, please." Beth got hold of herself. The immediate hurt in her arms loomed larger just then than the remembered pleasure of the evening. She hated herself for being false to the sweet, trusting girl who loved her so completely. She was suddenly appalled with her own cruelty, her own bad faith. She should have told Laura long ago how she really felt, and now it was too late. She must pay now, make it up to Laura, somehow heal the hurt. "Laura," she said, "Laura, honey, get mad at me or something. I can't stand it like this. I wouldn't hurt you for the world." Laura made herself keep calm by an immense effort of will. "Beth, don't try to explain. I'd rather not hear. I love you, Beth." She looked up at her and Beth bent down to kiss her, and Laura knew she had said the right things. No desperate anger would have brought Beth so close and made her so contrite. The gentler Laura was, the more Beth's conscience hurt her, the more viciously her deception bit into it. "Oh, Laura, Laura, I don't know what to say. Forgive me, forgive me. I'd do anything to make it up to you." "There's nothing to make up, Beth, is there? I mean, you just went out with a boy, that's all." "Well, I've been going out with boys, too, all year. I'm as guilty as you are." It was almost more than Beth could take. She had a brief, horrible vision of Laura learning the whole truth, and she stiffened against it, suddenly furious with Charlie for attracting her as he did. In an access of remorse, she said, Laura, I won't go out with him again if you don't want me to." It was so easy to say, so magically comforting. Laura was too powerfully tempted to refuse. She answered, looking up at Beth with a hopefully happy face that contradicted her cautious words. "Beth, I wouldn't ask you to do that. You know I wouldn't. You want me to. I can tell by your face." She took the slim face in her hands, and it seemed so anxious and so trusting that she said, all right, Laura." She embraced her and looked into a dark corner of the wall and thought, "Oh, God, give me strength. I can't hurt her any more. I just can't. It took a woman, it took Laura to teach me how to feel. I owe her my love. I owe it to her." She shut her eyes tight against Charlie and found him strong and clear in her mind. And then Laura said, "Beth, darling," and hugged her passionately, and Beth thought, "This is enough. This has got to be enough." "Laura," she said softly. They fell back on the couch together, and Beth let her have her way, tired though she was. A long while later she fell asleep, exhausted and unhappy, plagued by febrile dreams of first Charlie and then Laura, and then Charlie again, wondering what Charlie would think when she refused to see him, wondering if she had the guts to stick by Laura. She hardly dared to think of Charlie, for she no sooner reviled him roundly in her head than her body gave him an unconditional pardon. Laura lay still beside her, worried at her fitful turns, but clinging obstinately to Beth's promise. She had a frightening premonition that Beth would resent her bondage, but at least she couldn't break it. She had forged her own chains. Besides, it was so thrilling to feel Beth bound to her, to feel Beth her captive, that Laura couldn't see the dangers clearly. She was too sensitive not to be fuzzily aware that there were dangers, but she couldn't really believe in them just then. Beth was hers. Chapter 12. Emmy could hardly wait to hear about Charlie. She had to run after Beth in a mid-morning rush between classes and caught her speeding over the campus toward Lincoln Hall. "Have coffee with me," she begged. Beth was afraid. She knew too well what to expect from Emmy. "I have a class, Em." "Well, cut it." "Oh, come on." Beth slowed down. "Well," she said. She had to face it sooner or later. Emily would be wondering why she didn't see Charlie again. She'd have to make it sound plausible. Beth let herself be led to the nearest coffee spot. Emmy could hardly wait to ask questions. "How was it?" she said. Beth stirred her coffee carefully, watching the brown and white unite in her cup and come tan. "He's a very nice boy," she said. Emily waited. "Well, is that all?" she said finally. "No." She pulled the spoon out and looked at it. It was a tricky business trying to fool Emily. Emily knew her too well. "We had a very nice time." "What's all this nice? That doesn't mean anything." She leaned back and folded her arms. "What happened, Beth?" Beth wondered if she could possibly conceal it from her, and the weight of another lie pulled her spirits still lower. "He just doesn't have it, that's all. I know. When you saw us at Maxie's, I looked all excited, and I guess I was, but it wore off. She shrugged. "He's just another guy, Emmy. You're disappointed, maybe, but not with Charlie. Gee, Beth, I know you better than that. You're not in love with his face. At least, that's not all you're in love with." "Who's in love? With anything, or anybody? I didn't say I was in love." "You didn't need to." "Oh, Emmy," she exclaimed. "My God, does it show?" Emily took her confusion for confirmation. "When are you going to see him again?" Beth emptied the smoke from her lungs and said, "I don't know." If she had said never, she would have provoked a storm from Emily. "Is he going to call?" Emily felt her way carefully, surprised by Beth's evasiveness. Yes. When? I don't know, Emmy. Today, I guess. You don't know? Didn't he say? No. He's disappointed too, is that it? I guess so. I don't know. If he's disappointed, why is he going to call? Emmy, She had to protect Laura. She looked down again, defeated. I don't know. Emmy frowned, reaching for Beth's confidence with her sympathy, her affection, wondering why Beth suddenly distrusted her. What happened last night, Beth? She said again. Or don't you know that either? Beth wanted to scream at her. She made one last try to evade her. In a short, dry voice, she said, We had dinner, we danced, we talked, we made love, we came home. She sighed, hurting because the relief of truth was denied her, and because now it was Emily she had to lie to. But Laura must be spared. Laura, whose whole love she had taken for her sometime pleasure. Laura, whose trust she had wholly betrayed. Laura, to whom she owed the climax of love, and perhaps even her physical pleasure with Charlie. Beth, said Emily gently, why won't you talk to me? Is there something the matter? Beth looked up at her slowly, and Emmy took her hands and squeezed them. Beth, you're my best friend, she said. Don't you think I want to help, if I can? Gee, Beth, I tell you everything. I haven't a secret in the world from you. You know you can trust me. Beth couldn't answer. Did he hurt you? She shook her head. Did he threaten you, or was he disgusting, or... No, Emmy, She stopped, helpless. After a moment, she said, No, he was very nice. He didn't do anything. Emily released her hands and sat studying her in silence. Beth sipped her coffee and smoked and sweated in quiet misery. Finally, Emily said pointedly, It's Laura. Beth looked up at her with such a startled face that Emmy said, I thought so. I should have suspected this all along. Oh, Emmy, no, said Beth. She was almost sick with apprehension. Don't tell me, Beth. I've got eyes. You won't go out with Charlie because of Laura. Emmy, I swear to God, it's not true. It's not. Don't try to deny it, Beth. It's the only possible answer. Nothing else makes sense. Oh, Emmy, my God. She put her head in her hands, shaken to the core. How did you know? How did you ever? Simple, said Emmy. You have the softest heart in the world. Too darn soft for your very own good. You won't go out with Charlie because Laura's still got a crush on him. She smiled triumphantly. I knew it. I'm right, aren't I? Beth couldn't answer. She wanted to laugh hysterically with relief, and she wanted to get up and run. Emmy sighed and spun her cup slowly around by its handle. I know, because Laura felt so terrible last night before you got home. She even cried a little. And finally she just plain got mad at me. She said she just couldn't explain it, but I knew it was you and Charlie. Beth wondered if Emmy would see the tremor in her hands. I talked to her last night, she said. I think she's all right now. Now that you've told her you won't go out with Charlie, you mean? Oh, Emmy, Beth, I know you wouldn't lie to me. You'd tell me if this wasn't true. Now listen to me. Laura's a sweet girl, and I know you're fond of her, but this is ridiculous. You can't sacrifice a terrific guy, maybe your whole future, to one girl. You'll probably never see her again after next June. Beth, you're crazy about Charlie. Admit it. Beth put her head down on her arms and prayed for her sanity. Beth, you're hurting yourself forever, trying not to hurt Laura for a little while. For the wrong reasons, Emmy hit the right truth, but Beth was blind with her own distress. Oh, Emmy, you've got it all backwards. She broke off. Let's not talk about it. Let's please not talk about it. But I don't understand. Please, Emmy. She restrained an impulse to grasp her shoulders and shake her into silence. She stood up abruptly, suddenly at the end of her endurance, and said, I'm going up to the Union. I'll see you later, Emmy. Beth looked up, surprised and a little hurt. I'll come with you, Beth, she offered. No, you stay here and finish your coffee. Emily watched Beth stumble out of the lounge and made up her mind that she would interfere. Laura's crush would just have to give way to Beth's love. There were no two ways about it. Chapter 13. Mitch was curious. He pestered Charlie for the facts, and Charlie's evasions gave him the satisfaction of supposing the evening with Beth was a failure. "How far did you get?" he asked. Charlie sighed and looked up from his book. His temper was bad, but he tried to hold it back. "I got nowhere, boy. I wasn't trying to get anywhere." "Going to see her again?" "Of course." "When?" "I don't know," he said with martyred patience. And then, to illustrate his irritation, he added, "God damn it, now will you shut up?" Mitch complied, grinning comfortably. To see Charlie make a mistake with a woman was to see Romeo take a pratfall under the balcony. "What are you grinning at?" said Charlie. Mitch chuckled. "I didn't know I was." "You were." "Oh, I'm just glad to know you're fallible." Charlie plunged back into his book. He had been trying to reach Beth all day with no success. She wasn't at home, or she couldn't be disturbed. They couldn't say where she was or when she'd be back. Sorry, call again. And he did, again and again, with always the same results and the same obvious reason for them. She didn't want to talk to him. It was incomprehensible. For a long while he imagined that he had done something wrong, but the harder he pursued the idea, the less substance it had, and finally he gave it up. Something else was bothering her. Maybe they had gone too fast. Maybe they both had wanted too much too soon. He hadn't pushed it. He hadn't insisted on anything. She'd wanted it as much as he did. It had happened naturally. He couldn't accuse himself of anything there. The whole evening had seemed so right, so fair and lovely, and he wanted her again so much that it was impossible for him to admit that she didn't want him just as much. He didn't think she was a girl with a conventional conscience, but he was willing to admit that he might have been wrong there. She had certainly suffered enough over her past transgressions. What else could it be? He didn't think she was seeing anyone else. She came with him voluntarily and never made an objection to him. The more he thought of it, the more puzzled he was. Charlie didn't know he had an ally. Emily kept her peace as long as she could, but by the middle of exam week she couldn't hold out any longer. She knew Charlie had been trying to see Beth on campus, at the Union, everywhere, that he had been calling every day and getting nowhere, that he was upset and getting mad. She got half of this from Bud, who saw Charlie almost every day, and the rest from watching and listening to Beth, and pretty soon her Samaritan instincts got the better of her. She called Charlie. Mitch took a message for her. When Charlie got home, he found the note under the corner of the phone. "Call Emily at 74006. She says you'll understand. What's the mystery?" Charlie chucked his books on the sofa and picked up the phone, pulling off his jacket while it rang. "Good afternoon, Alpha Beta," said a bright young voice. "Hello, is Emily there?" "Just a moment, please." Charlie lighted a cigarette and waited, fidgeting. Minutes later, Emmy said, "Hello?" "Emmy?" he said eagerly. "Oh, Charlie, I'm so glad you called. Listen, I'm going to be perfectly frank with you. I know you've been trying to reach Beth." She hesitated. "Yeah," he said, urging her with his voice. "Well, she wants to see you, Charlie. I know it. She won't talk to you on account of Laura." "Laura? What the hell does Laura have to do with it?" "Beth's got it into her head that Laura's still got a crush on you." Charlie was floored. "Emmy, my God, she never did. Our fathers were old buddies in college. I never would have met the girl if it hadn't been for that. She doesn't have a crush on me. She never did. What the hell?" Emily was suddenly concerned. The words she phrased in such good faith seemed always to change character the moment they left her mouth. Not until she heard herself speak them did she understand them as other people did. She paused, trying to grasp the implications of the conversation. "Well," she said uncertainly, "Beth doesn't know that apparently. Anyway, Charlie, that's not the point. The point is she wants to see you. She's told me so. She's miserable, and if you could just talk to her. How? My God, I've been trying. I know, but she won't talk to you if she knows it's you. Call her on her private phone. We have one in the room. She doesn't know you have the number, so she'll answer it. Once she hears your voice, Charlie, it'll make all the difference. I know it. When can I call? Call her tonight about 7. She'll be alone in the room then. Laura's got a final at Greg Hall, and I'll just fade away. Emmy, you're a good girl. Oh, she'd do it for me. I just hate to see you two in a mess because of a silly misunderstanding. You just need a go-between. She laughed. What's her number? She told him. Thanks, Emmy, he said. I really appreciate this. They hung up, each wondering what sort of a game Laura was playing. Charlie figured it for some kind of petty jealousy, but Emily came closer. She began to review Laura's behavior systematically. The way she followed and imitated Beth, her disappointment when Beth wasn't at home, her temper when Beth wasn't there to greet her after Christmas vacation, her anger when Beth and Charlie went out. Emily admitted that it might be some sort of obsessive friendship, but even that idea made her uncomfortable. She was unwilling to accept it, but unable to dismiss it. But she said nothing to either of her roommates. At 7, as arranged, Charlie called Beth on her room phone. He listened nervously to the ring. It rang 4 times before Beth picked up the receiver. Hello? Beth, darling, this is Charlie. Don't hang up. Charlie? She began to tremble. Don't ask me anything, Beth. Just listen. I have to see you. Tonight. We have to talk. We owe each other that much. Can you be ready in 15 minutes? His voice was urgent and soft. It brought him too close to her. Charlie, she whispered, sinking into the desk chair, and tears started down her cheeks. I'll be by for you in 15 minutes, he said. Beth? Yes? 15 minutes, darling. He hung up before she could say anything. Beth put her head in her hands and gave one short, dreadful sob, and then she ran to wash her face and get dressed. She was ready when her buzz sounded a few minutes later and made her heart jump. She sped downstairs as if speed would obliterate her thoughts. Charlie was waiting at the foot of the stairs. She stopped when she saw him and moved toward him slowly, stopping in front of him in the hall. She hadn't even time to hate her weakness. She resolutely ignored the idea of Laura. She couldn't help herself. They stared at each other for a minute, and then he put his arm around her tight and led her outside without a word and down the walk to his car. He started the motor, and she watched him with her heart pulsing wildly and her hot hands knitted together. After a moment, he turned and regarded her and, still without a word, took her in his arms. With a gasp, she reached for him, and they kissed for a very long time, and then again. He turned the motor off, and for almost an hour they sat there with no words, only their lips and their trembling bodies to speak for them. Finally, she put her head down on his shoulder and cried soundlessly. Only her involuntary tremors betrayed her. When she was calm again, he said gently, "Want to talk to me, darling?" She shook her head. He tilted her face up and brushed away the leftover tears and smiled at her. "All right," he said. "I won't torture you with questions. You'll find a way to tell me. Only tell me this, honey. Did I do something wrong?" "No." She smiled faintly at him, and looking at him wanted him again and lifted her lips to be kissed. He took them almost violently, and then, holding her, he said, "Is there someone else?" She couldn't answer. She struggled with herself and couldn't answer. I'm sorry, he said. "I said no questions, didn't I?" He released her, frowning and rubbing his brow. "Let's get a beer." He looked at her, but she didn't answer. "I can only take so much of this, Beth. Beer, honey?" "Okay," she said. They went over to Pratt's and talked very little because there was only one thing to talk about and it couldn't be said. So they studied each other's faces in the candlelight and locked their hands together and got a little drunk, more on each other than on the beer. And Beth fought off the haunting image of Laura's face from time to time when it got too strong and began to accuse her. Charlie had to say something finally. "Emmy called me," he said. "She gave me your number." Oh, she smiled at him. She said something that made me think you might have a wrong impression, honey. Of what? He knocked a column of ash from his cigarette and said musingly, 28 years ago, my father went to school here with a guy named Merrill Landon. They've been friends ever since. When I found out Landon's daughter was here in school last fall, I called her up and we went out a couple of times. He paused to study her. Do you see what I'm getting at? There was a line of worry between Beth's eyes. What did Emmy tell you, Charlie? She said she thought you wouldn't see me because of Laura, because you thought Laura had a crush on me. Darling, Laura never did have a crush on me. We're just friends, or rather the children of friends. Was that the trouble? Beth stared helplessly at him, her fingers pressed against her cheeks. He watched her for a moment, feeling that he was losing her again. Beth, you can't let Laura come between us. She means nothing to me, except as a family friend. There's no reason. It's not Laura's fault. Don't blame anything on Laura. She has nothing to do with it. Charlie wanted to squeeze the truth out of her, but her worried face warned him it wouldn't work. She was as stubborn as Emmy had said she was. All right, darling, I won't push you any farther, he said. On one condition. On one condition, Beth. Look at me. He pulled her toward him. That you see me again. Her eyes dropped. Beth! His voice ordered her attention. All right, she whispered unhappily. She couldn't resist him when she was with him, just as she couldn't hurt Laura when they were together. All right, Charlie. Tomorrow? I don't know. Look, Beth, he said, suddenly getting disciplinary with her. I know you've got trouble, honey. I know you're up against something. I'm not trying to force you or push you around or frighten you. Maybe you've got obligations somewhere else. Maybe you can't help what you're doing. Okay, but damn it, Beth, you've got obligations to me too, whether you want 'em or not. You can't play with people, honey. You can't do... He groped a little. You can't behave the way you did with me, say the things you did, and suddenly drop me like a hot potato. Nobody can take that, Beth. Not me, not anybody. I wasn't playing, Charlie. I was serious. Only, please, please don't ask me what the trouble is. I can work it out. Just give me time. She raised her eyes again, imploring him. He sighed and said a little crisply, All right, I'll give you time, Beth, if that's what you want. But I won't sit around making phone calls that don't get answered and playing tricks on you just so I can see you. I'm going to see you, and you're going to make a date right here and now and stick to it. Do you hear me? She nodded. Do you have an exam tomorrow? No. Okay, I'm out at 4. I'll pick you up at 5. We'll go out, have dinner, see a show or something. He paused. Okay, love? She nodded. He looked at the wall clock and said, Okay, let's go. Almost closing hours. Beth got up with a start. Laura would be home already. Her final couldn't have lasted longer than 10 o'clock. It was 10:20. At the house, Charlie stopped the car and turned to gaze at her for a minute, and then he got out without kissing her. Beth was chagrined, almost angry. He opened her door and let her out. Come on, honey, he said in a businesslike voice. It's cold. She got out, watching him hopefully. He took her arm, slammed the door, and started for the house. Charlie, she said, pulling back, and the tone of her voice reproved him. He stopped and looked at her, and she threw her arms around him and kissed him until he held her and answered her. Charlie, darling, she said. It was as grateful as it was inadequate. At the door she clung to him, almost afraid to let him go, afraid to face Laura. But the house mother shooed him out with the others, and she had to watch him leave. She went slowly up to her room and pushed the door open with a sort of dread and walked in. Emily looked up from the desk. Oh, Beth, she said, how was it? Was it all right? Beth nodded. Yes, Em, thanks. Where's Laura? In bed. In bed? Beth could hardly believe it. Yes, she got home from the final and... She shrugged. She said she was tired. Didn't she ask where I was? Well, she asked if you'd gone out, and I said yes. She knew right away with who. I just told her you went out for a beer with him. I mean, I had to tell her. She would have found out anyway. Beth turned and took her coat off. Emily watched her with a host of questions on her tongue. How's Charlie? She said. Fine. We sort of made it up. I'm going to see him tomorrow. Will you tell Laura? Yes, I'll tell her. She shuddered at the thought. Will she understand? Emmy was half expecting an admission of what she didn't know. Yes, she'll understand. The hell she will, she thought. Beth, said Emmy, hesitating. You aren't mad at me for calling him, are you? No, Em, I'm not mad. You're acting sort of funny. I'm tired, Emmy. Emmy went over to her. Beth, are you in love? Really? I don't know. Yes, you do. Are you? Beth sighed, and her strength seemed to leave her with her breath. Yes, she said, and suddenly it felt good. Yes, yes, Emmy. Emily hugged her. Oh, Beth, I'm so glad. Emmy, you make me feel... She tumbled her hair with nervous fingers. Everything's such a mess right now. But it'll all turn out, Beth. Things are never as bad as they seem. Most of the things you worry about never happen, you know. Have you told him? No, I'm a little afraid to, I guess. Oh, well, you'll get over that. Beth, I'm so happy for you. Beth had to answer her smile and fight it at the same time. Emily's warmth brought the truth to the surface in her. She wanted awfully to confess, but the thought of Laura, so alone, so lovingly given, so badly used, stopped her again. Guess what? Said Emmy, with her eyes bright and her yellow hair alive in the lamplight. What? Oh, he won't even think it's the truth, she said, looking at her bare toes in the pile of the rag rug. Beth smiled indulgently at her. It was a brief hiatus of relief from her own troubles. Yes, I will, Emmy, if you say so. What? It's Bud. I really love him. I'd do anything for him. Beth couldn't help laughing a little. You've been in love with him all year, Em. Not like this. This is it, Beth. She gripped Beth's arms in dead earnest. Mary Lou's request floated hazily back to Beth. She had completely forgotten to talk to Emmy in the press of her own difficulties. Emmy, you haven't done anything. Oh, no, Beth. If it were real, as Emmy said, then it was wrong. Bud was too undependable, too uninhibited. Emmy, don't get carried away. Use your head. Oh, Em. Emmy hung her head as if she might begin to cry. Beth, you don't believe me, she whispered. Yes, I do, Emmy. Only, be sensible, honey. I mean, in public and everything. I mean, do you really? She brightened. Because I do love him. Yes, Emmy, I know. She was too tired to argue. And he loves me. He told me so. Oh, Emmy, I'm so glad. What else could she say? She fell into bed later, too tired to think. Chapter 14. The next day, Beth and Laura hedged with each other for a while before either of them would say anything. Finally, Laura said in a tight voice, You saw him last night, Beth. Why won't you just tell me? Why do I have to tell you? Well, because I'm a little ashamed, I guess. Because I'm sorry, Laura. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't have to. Why didn't you just tell me you were going to see him again? She couldn't keep the bite out of her words. Because I didn't know it myself, honey. You didn't? Laura gazed past her coolly and out the window. Oh, Laura, honey. Beth tried to think of something better to say, but there was nothing. No, I didn't. Beth, I didn't ask you not to see him again. You said you wouldn't see him again. You said it, not me. It was your idea. If I had asked you not to and you'd agreed, that would be different. But I didn't ask for anything. You went back on your word, Beth, after you gave it voluntarily. She was shaking with the force of her feeling, and she worked to keep her voice steady. Laura, honey, he called. He got my number. I didn't know. And when I talked to him, I owed him an explanation, Laura. I couldn't just drop him. Everyone thinks I dropped him because you still have a crush on him, don't you see? But he knows you don't, Laura. He knows? Of course he knew. He took her out as a favor to her father. But did Beth know about her family then? Had he told her of the divorce? Yes. He said your fathers were friends. He said you didn't have a crush on him at all. I had to see him. Explain it. Say something. I had to, don't you see? I see, she said. How did he figure all this out? If he knew I didn't have a crush on him, why did he think you wouldn't see him for my sake? Well, I don't know. Why didn't he figure out that there might have been another boy in your life? Or family troubles? Or something he did wrong? Why didn't he figure out any of those things, Beth? How come the first thing he thought of was me? Laura, he didn't exactly. Well, exactly what did happen, Beth? She felt furious tears start up. He talked to Emmy, Laura. Emmy thought I wouldn't see him because of you. It was her idea. What right does Emmy have to go blabbing to him? What right does Emmy have to think anything about us? She caught her breath, looking for words to cut with. Why can't Emmy mind her own business and leave us alone? Laura, please don't get excited, honey. Answer my question. Beth sighed and looked at her hands. Emmy wanted to help. She knew I wasn't happy. She knows me pretty well. Well, I guess I don't want to help and I don't know you at all and I made you unhappy. Is that it? Laura, well, is it, Beth? Suddenly an awful fear overswept her anger. Oh, Beth, can't we be happy? She pleaded. We were so happy before. What happened? Why does Charlie matter? The tears spilled over. Do we have to quarrel and make each other miserable like this? Oh, baby, no, we'll work it out, somehow. She reached for her and Laura cried in her arms. Beth, we have such a beautiful thing together. We just can't let anything happen to it. We can't let anyone hurt it or come between us. Beth wondered where the words were that would win her pardon. There didn't seem to be any. Beth, Laura whispered, you won't see him again, will you? Beth was silent, not because she was torn again between the two, but because she hadn't the guts to say, yes, I will see him. Beth? Laura's voice was small and lost, like a child's in an empty room. Beth pressed her close. I don't know, she whispered. Laura took it in silence, and in a moment Beth added, I might have to, Laura, I might have to ward off suspicion. Beth, please. It was almost inaudible. Laura, baby, I can't promise. I think I have to see him. Why? Her voice came out again, demanding. I've told you why. What will he think about you and me if I don't? Laura sat up and pulled away from her. I don't care what he thinks. I don't care. I'm not ashamed. Are we doing something dirty or wicked to be ashamed of? Are we, Beth? No. She shut her eyes and said slowly, but other people don't understand that, Laura. We have to keep it secret. Absolutely secret. People will say we're queer. But we're not. I know what queer is. I've seen people. Laura. We're just as queer as the ones who look queer, Beth said sharply, looking at her. We're doing the same damn thing. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Let's be honest with each other at least. Her own deception shut her up. Laura sat and stared at her with a horrified face. Beth, she quavered, shaking her head. No. Beth grasped her hands. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. That was a terrible way to say it. I'm just so damn upset. Are we really? She couldn't say the word. Are we, Beth? Yes. Laura was mute for a minute, and then she said, All right, then we are. She set her chin. That still doesn't make it dirty or wicked. No, Beth smiled ruefully at her and kissed her hands. It just makes it illegal. Laura pulled her hands away and for a long while said nothing. Finally she said, Are you going to see him then? Yes. How did he know your phone number? Emmy. Laura stood up suddenly and turned an outraged back to Beth. Laura, Emmy's a friend, a very close friend of mine. Not of mine. Try to understand, Laura. She only wanted to help. Can't you make her understand you don't need help? That would hurt her terribly. I can't hurt her, Laura. You can't hurt her, but you can hurt me. Oh, Laura. Beth put her head in her hands. I don't want to hurt either of you, she said from between her palms. I don't want to hurt anybody. Well, choose between us then, because apparently one of us has to be hurt. Laura, will you stop? Beth cried, looking at her. My God, who's hurting who? What are you trying to make me do? What do you want me to say? Laura went to her and sank to her knees beside her. She put her head in Beth's lap, clutching at her, and said hoarsely, I want you to love me, Beth, that's all. I want you to love me. Say that's selfish. Say it's anything you want to call it. I can't help it. I love you more than life or death, and I can't stand to think of losing you. I can't stand it, Beth. Do you hear me? Oh, Beth, Beth, my darling, say you love me. Say that, and I don't care what happens. I don't care what else you say or what you do or even what we are. I don't care if you'll only just tell me you love me. Beth, you do love me, don't you? Yes, Laura. Say it. I love you, Laura. Laura shut her eyes and didn't see the suffering in Beth's. There was nothing more they could say to each other then, and there was nothing more they could do. Emily would be back from lunch at any moment, and both of them realized how dangerous it would be to continue as they were. They silently started tidying up the room. Emily found her roommates in a state of apparent calm. Laura was collecting a pile of books and getting ready to leave. "Where are you going, Laura?" said Emily conversationally. "Over to the library." Laura wouldn't look at her. She was furious with Emily. "I'll be down in Mary Lou's room, Emmy. We have that comparative lit final tomorrow," Beth said, starting out of the room. "If anyone calls, I'll be down there." She looked cautiously at Laura, but Laura seemed unperturbed. "Okay," said Emily. "Hey, when are you going out?" She knew instantly, from the look on Beth's face, that Beth hadn't told Laura about her date. Emmy bit her tongue too late. "I don't know," Beth said, and she and Laura looked at each other. "He said he'd call. About 5, I think." Laura stood perfectly still with a book in her hands and stared at Beth. Emmy made the diplomatic move. The coming storm raised enough charge to frighten her out of the room. "Guess I'll go see Bobby," she said hastily, and backed out. She pulled the door shut behind her and walked down the hall in bewilderment. She didn't go to see Bobby. She went to the living room and sat down in an alcoved corner and began, in spite of herself, to analyze the situation. She could put 2 and 2 together, but she could not believe in 4 until she saw it with her own eyes. It was the most difficult logic she ever faced. It was simple, irrefutable, and incredible. A lover's quarrel. Emmy gave an involuntary shudder. Laura didn't say anything for a few moments after Emmy left. She sat down at the desk and stared out the window, speechless. Beth came up behind her, afraid to touch her, and stood behind her chair for a moment. Finally she said, "I meant to tell you, Laura. I just couldn't, after we got to talking. I can't bear to hurt you. Everything I say, everything I do hurts you. It was cowardly, I know, I'll admit it. God knows I can't bear pain, and when I hurt you, I suffer too. I suffer terribly." No sound, no gesture came from Laura. Beth went around and sat on the desk and looked at her. "Laura, honey, you said it didn't matter. You said nothing mattered as long as we had each other. You said you didn't care as long as I loved you. Do you love me, Beth? You know I do." "No, I don't." "I do, Laura. Then why didn't you tell me? Why do you lie to me, Beth?" "Oh, darling, I'm afraid the truth hurts sometimes. I didn't really lie to you, Laura. I just tried to shield you. You should have told me, Beth. You never tell me anything. I have to guess. And if I ask the right questions, maybe I get the right answers. Otherwise, I never learn anything. Not telling the truth is as wrong as telling lies, Beth. You knew all the time this morning you were going out with him this afternoon. It's yourself you're trying to shield." Beth sighed. "I'm going out with him this evening, Laura, because there's no way to explain to him why I won't go out." "All right, Beth. Why didn't you just tell me that? I'd rather be hurt honestly than dishonestly." "Oh, Laura, don't you understand? I understand that I'm being treated like an irresponsible child," Laura exclaimed. "I'm being shielded from nothing, Beth. It's yourself you're trying to protect." "Can't you believe I'd do something, anything for you? Laura, if I've lied, and I have, it's been for your sake. Can't you understand that? My God, I've had to lie to Charlie for you and to Emmy and even to myself," she finished silently. "And me." "No, Laura." Laura nodded at her. "Yes, Beth, yes. Beth, I've been honest with you, absolutely honest, but you've got to be the same with me. I know I'm young. I know I'm inexperienced and childish sometimes, But you can't help me to grow up by treating me like a child, by shooing me out while you share your secrets with somebody else. Laura, I'm not sharing them with anyone else, she said, and her voice was tired. You haven't any right to deceive me, Beth, said Laura unhappily. Beth's sorrow suddenly swelled and split inside and poisoned her. God damn it, Laura, she exploded. Damn it, damn it, damn it. I've done nothing that I didn't do for your sake. Nothing. She stood up and strode to the other side of the room and whirled to face Laura. Will you never understand that? I've made mistakes. I know. I've hurt you. I know that too. But do you have to keep on it? Do you have to cavil and pester and torment me day after day? Beth, like a damn silly little child? Beth, you make it impossible for me to handle this any other way, Laura. I thought we could handle the thing like adults, but apparently we aren't quite capable of that. But, Beth, didn't you understand what I meant? Yes, I understand. I understand that you're at least aware that I'm not the only one who's made mistakes. I suppose I'm to be grateful for it. The ache inside her was so awful that she went to extremes for the littlest relief. She hardly knew what she said or cared. What do you want me to do, Laura? Never speak to Emmy again? Never speak to Charlie? Lock myself in a damn garret with you somewhere and rot? Is that what you want? Laura looked at her, shaking her head, frightened. Well, there's a world around us, Laura, Beth went on, as if Laura had said no, and we're damn near grown up, however young we may act, and we've damn well got to go out and live in it. And crying over each other and clinging to each other and denying the rest of the world exists is sure as hell not the way to do it. That's a child's way, Laura, and if you haven't grown up enough by now to see it, then damn it, I don't know. I can't help. I can only mess it up for you. If you're still a child, then go home. Go on back home to your mother and father where you'll be happy. Let them worry about you. Let them take care of you. I can't. Everything I do is wrong. Well, go back to your happy home and let your parents figure it out. Laura put her head down on her arms, resting on the back of the desk chair, and never said a word. Beth wanted to see her temper, not her surrender. She wanted a fight, and she persecuted Laura still further. She walked to Laura's chair and said, The world is half men, Laura. The world is one half men. Does that make sense? Well, does it? Yes, and I like men, Laura. Now, that's honest. And I like Charlie. That's honest, too. Does it hurt enough for you? Honesty? Does it? Yes. I like Charlie, and I'm going to see Charlie when I feel like it. Is that honest enough for you? Yes. Beth went to the closet and got her coat. You can't love a girl all your life, Laura. You can't be in love with a girl all your life. Sooner or later you have to grow up. She pulled the coat on, and suddenly she couldn't look at Laura for knowing how horribly she had hurt her. It began to overwhelm Beth, and she had to get out before it strangled her. Tell Mary Lou I had to go out, will you? She said brusquely. Laura lifted her head. Where are you going? She said. Her delicate face was discolored by the eruption of pain, and on her underarms, where Beth couldn't see, her nails raised red welts, trying to call attention from the great pain with a lesser. Where are you going, Beth? She whispered. Out, said Beth. When will you be back? Tonight, closing. She paused at the door and looked at Laura, and she knew she'd never forget what she saw. Then she went out. Downstairs in the hall she phoned Charlie. This is Beth, she said. Where's your final? Math building. When will you be out? About 4, maybe sooner. I'll be at Maxie's. Honey, are you all right? Yes, I'm all right. You sure? He felt the tension and was doubtful. Yes, Charlie, I have to go. Okay, Maxie's. He hung up, worried. Beth went out and walked. She walked over to the campus and across it to Campus Town and down the block to Maxie's, half wild with pain and doubt and anger. Girls didn't usually go into Maxie's alone, but Beth walked in without looking to right or left, stopped at the bar to get some beer — they didn't serve anything stronger — and found a dark booth in a back corner. There was only a small crowd, and no one paid her much attention. She looked too grim for company. She sat back there alone until almost 4 o'clock, with many trips to the bar for more beer. When Charlie found her, she was slumped in the booth with her head back and her eyes closed. He slid in beside her and shook her gently. "Beth, darling," he said. She opened her eyes and looked at him as if she had never seen him before, and then she smiled. "Let's get out of here," he said. He pulled her to her feet and helped her into her coat. She swayed a little, saying nothing and letting him steady her and lead her out into the cold air. He took her to his car and guided her in. "How long have you been there?" he said. She put her head back on the seat. "Since 2. She smiled a little at the ceiling of the car. "Did you have any lunch?" "Mm-hmm." "What time?" "Noon." He started the car. "You need some black coffee, darling." "No, Charlie." She turned her head on the seat and reached for the back of his neck. She stroked it with her long fingers and said, "No, Charlie, come get drunk with me." He looked at her with a curious smile. "What's the matter, Beth? I won't tell you unless you get drunk with me." "I don't want to get drunk." "Yes, you do, Charlie. Charlie, please, darling. Yes, you do." "What's got into you?" She smiled. "Beer," she said. "I'm sick of beer. Can't we go somewhere and drink martinis?" Charlie laughed. "Oh, you're a funny girl." He caressed her hair with his hand. "I know. You'll never find another like me, Charlie. Humor me. Get drunk with me." She tickled his ears. "Please?" He turned away, smiling a little out the windshield. "If I get you a martini, will you tell me what the hell's the matter?" "Uh-huh." "Promise?" "Yes." He paused a moment, and then he drove her downtown. There was a hotel 2 blocks from the railway station, with a small bar in it, and he took her there with some misgivings and a firm intention to drag her out after 1 drink. She behaved very well. She didn't stumble or mumble, and she wasn't loud. They sat quietly at a dark table, and she teased him, and they talked about nothing, and pretty soon Beth wanted another drink. "You said you'd tell me what the trouble was if I bought you 1 martini, he said. "Yes, I know. Well, I find I'll need 2. She smiled charmingly at him. "That's just what you don't need, darling. You're already loaded on beer. How much beer did you have?" "Not very much." "You were asleep when I came." "I was not. I was thinking." "Anyway, you promised you'd tell me after 1 martini." "Did I? I can't remember. It's a funny thing about me, Charlie. I never keep my promises. Never believe me when I promise you something." "What's the trouble, Beth?" "1 more drink," she pleaded. He looked at her askance, and she gave him a little girl smile and said, "I'll be good, honest." She felt a driving, desperate, relentless need to forget. "I think you need some black coffee and some food. After this drink." He shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "Charlie." Her voice was tender and soft. "Please." With a sigh, he signaled the waiter. 2 more, he said, and she smiled. He put his arm around her and said, "Now talk to me, Beth. Talk to me." She cocked her head a little to one side and said with sleepy suggestiveness, "Charlie, let's go to bed. I want to go to bed with you, Charlie." He smiled quizzically at her. "Later, honey. I want you to make love to me." She put her head back against him and looked up at him so that their lips were very near and Laura was very far away. "I want it. I want to be so close to you that I can't get any closer. I want you to hold me so tight that I can never get away. So it won't be my fault if I never go back. Can you hold me that tight, darling?" Charlie felt his heart speed up and he tried to fight the feeling. "I'm worried about you, Beth. I'm worried," he said. He pushed an errant curl behind her ear and kissed her cheek and said, "Tell me why you want to get drunk." She pulled away from him and lifted her glass and drank half the martini. "I just want to get drunk. I like to get drunk. I haven't been drunk for years. Anything wrong with that? Besides, I can't think of anybody I'd rather get drunk with than you." "That's the truth?" "Mm-hmm. And nothing but the truth?" "Yes." "Beth?" His voice implied that he knew better. She turned and looked him full in the face and said, "Charlie, I wouldn't lie to you," and shook her head to augment her honesty, and then she picked up her glass and finished her drink. Charlie watched it go apprehensively. "Why not?" he said. "Why wouldn't you lie to me?" "Why, Charlie?" she said, laughing a little. "Because you're the most beautiful man in the world. You know that, darling? You're beautiful. Yeah, I know. He grinned sardonically at his drink. You told me once, but you can lie to anybody, Beth. Doesn't matter what they look like. Nobody ever told me that, she said. Think of all the lies I could have told. I've been lying to the wrong people, Charlie. Maybe I should tell them the truth and see how they like it. Maybe they'd start telling lies themselves. It's awful to be the only one. It's lonesome. He frowned seriously at her. One more drink, she said. No. She picked up his glass and drank almost all the drink before he could stop her. My God, you're a queer one, he said, laughing. She put her head back and laughed with him. It seemed unbearably funny. Oh, she said, trying to catch her breath. You called it, Charlie. You're so right. You have no idea. And she laughed again. When she was calmer, she leaned against him and turned her luscious eyes to his face and said, Charlie, darling? What? He said, smiling at her. Can I excite you? Just looking at you, I mean. His mouth dropped a little, and then his smile widened, and he turned and fingered the stem of his glass. Don't be foolish, honey. Charlie, look at me. He looked. I'll bet I could. Not here, Beth, not now. Oh, yes, here and now. I think it's high time we leave, he said, making a move to get up. But she gripped his thigh, and he stopped cold. Beth, my God, he said in a low voice. Are you out of your head? Damn it, stop. She didn't answer, and she didn't obey. Charlie, she said, smiling with her lips parted. We can't go now. We can't go now. You'll make a spectacle of yourself. Beth! He stared at her astonished. Waiter, she said, taking advantage of his confusion. The man saw her two raised fingers and nodded. And now when Beth started to pull her hand away, Charlie caught it and pulled it back. She felt his breath come fast, and her own excitement began to mount. She leaned against him and said voluptuously, We're going to have a nice slow drink. It'll calm your nerves. Beth, for God's sake, he said. Oh, Jesus, Beth, you're crazy. You're absolutely crazy. I know, I'm crazy. That's my excuse. That's my excuse, Charlie. I need an excuse. I'm a girl in need of an excuse. You'd be surprised how I need. I hear you, he said, smiling a little. I need one myself right about now. What's it like, Charlie? What's what like? He said cautiously. What's it like to feel the way you do right now? God, Beth, he said softly, and she felt a tremor run through him. Stop talking, darling. He pushed her away. The waiter brought their drinks. Beth, let's go, he whispered. Let's go, honey. No, she said. You haven't had your nice drink. Drink your martini, darling, like a good boy. I don't want the damn drink. Damn the drinks, let's go. No, she said, and smiled at him. You don't have to drink yours, but I'm going to drink mine. She drank half of it and leaned toward him. How do you feel now, Charlie? Beth, you damn little witch, he said. Tell me, she begged. I want to know. I don't know, he said, but I'm going to tear this goddamn table apart if we don't get out of here right now. She patted his arm. Drink your drink, dear. Maybe the table will go away. Beth, he pleaded. He trembled again and pulled her hard against him. Charlie, what will the neighbors think? I mean, we have to think of our reputations. I mean, my God, here we are in public and everything. She felt giddily funny. Everything was funny. Charlie started to take her drink away from her, but she snatched it back and finished it, and some spilled on her blouse. Charlie, darling, look what I've done. Wipe it off. She smiled at him like a malevolent siren. Wipe it off, darling, she whispered. He looked at the drops of liquor melting slowly into her cotton blouse and swallowed hard. You're sweating, Charlie, she said. Beth, we've got to go. Oh, no, she said. Charlie, you can't. Can't be damned, I have to. Your drink. You can't leave your drink. He picked it up and drank it all down and set the glass hard against the tabletop. All right, let's go. He got up holding his coat and pulled her after him. He put an arm around her to steady her and guided her out of the bar. They walked toward the car. Charlie, you're wonderful when you're drunk, she said. You're wonderful when you're excited. I want to kiss you, darling. He propelled her sternly toward the car, and when they reached it, he sighed with relief. Can we go back to the apartment? She whispered, when they pulled away from the curb. No, Mitch is there. We'll go out to the motel on 45, out near the air base. Anywhere, she said. She put her head down in his lap. Charlie, how long will it be? How far do we have to go, darling? Beth, don't ask me questions. I've got all I can do to drive. He reached down with one hand and tore her blouse open. Beth chuckled at him and heard the buttons chink on the floor. At stoplights, he pulled her up and kissed her, violently, nearly crushing her. The tires screamed when he rounded a corner, and he drove a wild 18 miles to the motel. He pulled Beth out of the car and into the room so fast that he had her laughing again, dizzy and wild and hot, like carousel music. He almost tore her clothes off her. He didn't even turn the light on. She fell back on the bed laughing, teasing him, pestering him, refusing to help with her clothes. "Oh, Beth," he said, and his voice was rough. "Beth, God, I need you. God, I wish I understood you. Oh, darling." His groan thrilled her. She surrendered passionately to him, and for a while she forgot her pain. For a while there wasn't any pain. There was only a heady, purifying madness. She let her mind empty as her body was fulfilled. For a long time they lay in each other's arms, half asleep, murmuring to each other, absorbed with each other. "Feel better, darling?" he said. "Or do you want to go out and get drunk again?" He laughed against her shoulder. "No, don't have to. This'll last forever. Oh, Charlie, I don't know what I'd do without you. I just don't know. I thought I caused all your troubles." "Oh, let's not talk about troubles, please. Can't you tell me about it, honey? Not now. Later. Please, later." He lay still for a minute, and then he said, with his lips moving softly against her skin, "What am I going to do with you, Beth? You worry me, darling. I don't know how I'm going to leave you. I guess this is the first vacation I haven't looked forward to since I started college. I'm almost afraid to leave you, Beth. I wish to hell I knew what was the matter." "Nothing's the matter, nothing, not now." She cuddled against him. He stroked her hair. "I wish I could believe that, honey." After a while they got up. It was almost 9 o'clock. They were slow and sleepy getting into their clothes, and often they had to stop and hold each other. Every time they separated, Beth felt the pain a little more. It was coming back, little by ominous little. "We'll stop on the way back and get something to eat," he said. "You must be starving." Beth felt herself, as if that might clarify the matter, and said, "I don't know." They stopped at a drive-in on the outskirts of town and got a couple of hamburgers and some coffee. "Well," he said, "did you get Laura straightened out?" "Straightened out? Wasn't she giving you a hard time?" "Emmy said something. I don't know." "Oh, she's just temperamental. She's just, I don't know. Let's not talk about Laura." He was silent for a minute, eating his sandwich, and then he said, "Why didn't she want you to go out with me?" "Oh, she had a crush on you, that's all." The bread and meat stuck suddenly as her throat went dry with alarm. "No, she didn't." "She did, darling. Anyway, how do you know she didn't?" "Oh, hell, I don't know. I can tell. Can't you tell when someone has a crush on you?" "Not always." "Well, I can, and Laura didn't." "Well, she did, Charlie. I talked to her. We sort of had it all out." "Why was this so hard to tell me?" "It wasn't. It's not hard, I'm telling you. The last time I saw you, you couldn't. It was so damn difficult you couldn't even think about it." Beth forced herself to swallow. She was beginning to feel edgy with anxiety. "Oh, well, I hadn't talked to Laura then. I didn't have a chance. I didn't want to say anything until I talked to her." He raised an eyebrow at her. "Well, what did you say when you talked to her?" "Oh, I told her she was behaving like a child. I was kind of nasty, I guess. I said she was acting like a spoiled brat, and spoiled brats belong at home with their doting parents." "My God, you were nasty. Jesus, honey, that was pretty low, wasn't it?" She frowned at him. "What do you mean? It wasn't so bad. She was acting like a child. I just told her if she couldn't act grown up, she'd better go back to her family where she belongs, where somebody'll take care of her." "She can't, Beth." "She can't? Didn't she tell you? I mean, didn't you know?" "Know what?" Beth put her hamburger down, feeling suddenly sick. The incipient hangover, the passion, the overcooked beef combined to aggravate her misery. "They're divorced. Happened just before she came down to school. I guess it was pretty bad. Anyway, Laura was all upset about it." He paused. "You didn't know this?" Beth shook her head. "That's why I kept taking her out. She needed a shoulder to cry on. Poor kid. She really needed somebody. She was terribly alone. Still is, I guess. I felt sorry for her. My God, didn't she tell you all this?" "She didn't tell anybody." You'd think she'd have told you. I mean, roommates, you know. Beth held her head. Oh, Charlie, I feel awful. Oh, I feel awful. Honey, are you going to be sick? I guess so, she whispered. Yes, you are, he said with a swift, critical glance. Come on, here we go. Can you make it to the ladies' room? I don't know. He led her as fast as he could to the john. She made it just inside the door, fell to her knees, and let the sickness flow out of her. 10 minutes later she came out, very pale. Charlie, I want to go home, she said. I want to go home. I know. I'll take you home. You're going to be all right, darling. Don't worry. He took her out to the car and drove her back to the house. She said nothing, leaning heavily against him and moaning a little now and then. At the house he stopped and took her in his arms. Poor little girl, he said. Feel any better? A little. Darling, that was my last exam today. How long will you be down here? Day after tomorrow. Leave at noon. Will I see you? Charlie, oh, darling, Okay, he said. When will you be back? February 6th. I'll be here the 5th, in case you come early. Charlie. She sat up a little and looked at him. Darling, oh, I've been a bitch. Oh, Charlie, I'm a mess. Darling, I love you, Beth, he said, and he kissed her. She clung to him for a minute, and then she said, I love you, Charlie. It was plain and awesome honesty, and it felt deliriously good. He took her face in his hands. Beth, take good care of yourself. Take good care of yourself, darling. Chapter 15. Emily and Laura had a brief, bitter exchange of words. Laura precipitated it. She simply looked up from her studies and said, with no introduction, Emmy, why did you call Charlie? She was immediately sorry she had said it, but she was frantically worried about Beth and desperately unhappy. Emily was startled. Well, she said, she wanted to see him, Laura. It seemed as if it was the only way. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings about it. How did you know she wanted to see him? I could just tell, Laura. Did it ever occur to you that Beth might not want to go out with him? No, it never did, said Emmy. This wasn't the Laura Landon of last fall. Passive, pleasant, unemotional. I don't understand why you don't know Beth any better than you do, Emmy. Sometimes I think you don't know her at all, Laura snapped. Laura, Beth wanted to go out with him. She didn't have to go, you know, even after I called him. Well, of course she had to go out with him after she talked to him. What could she say? I don't know, Laura. What could she say? Laura went suddenly cold. Her eyes dropped and she fumbled with her book. I don't know, she said in this small voice. Why don't you want Beth and Charlie to go out together, Laura? Emmy's voice was soft. If what she suspected were true, why hadn't Beth been honest with her about it? Beth had never deliberately lied to her before about anything. They just aren't right for each other, that's all. How do you know? Because I know Beth, Laura flared. But you don't know Charlie very well. Laura turned on her. Emmy, what are you trying to say? Emmy, confronted with an angry challenge, was silent. Laura rose slowly to her feet. I'm going to bed, she said icily, and walked stiffly to the door. Emmy sat on the couch uncomfortably. She had no desire to stay in the room either. It had suddenly become a sinister, unfamiliar place to her. She gathered some books together, scribbled a note to Beth, and ran down the hall. At 10:35, Beth found the note on her dresser. Laura's in bed. I'm in Bobby's room. Come get me if you want me. I'll be up late. Love, M. Beth crumpled the note and tossed it into the wastebasket and undressed. She looked at her blouse with the little rips now in place of buttons and thought of Charlie. But all the cutting words she directed at Laura that afternoon came back to torment her. She went to the washroom to clean up, and when she got back to the room, Laura was in it. She was standing looking out the window toward the street with her back to Beth. Beth said nothing. She put her things away and stood at her dresser for a minute, silent. Beth, said Laura softly, I was wrong. She had learned her lesson. The only way to bring Beth back was to be gentle and yielding with her. It worked before where even the most righteous temper failed. Beth scolded her for being a child, but Laura knew she liked her best that way. Laura was willing to play the game, any game, if it meant keeping Beth. If you need Charlie, I guess you should have him, Laura said. She didn't turn around. She spoke to the window panes. Beth regarded her back. Laura, I was hateful to you. I was unforgivable. Let's not talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. You're forgiven, Beth. Beth put her arms around her and her head down against Laura's. Laura, she whispered, I understand. At least, I'll try to understand. Laura, I need you, honey. I can't just drop you so hard so suddenly, and besides, you're so sweet to hold. Not good like Charlie, but I wonder if I could have you both. Laura turned around and put her arms around Beth and looked up at her. Beth, she said humbly, will we be together just once in a while? Yes, honey, Beth kissed her forehead. Yes, we will. Behind them, Emmy pushed the door open. Beth had forgotten to close it all the way, and it didn't make a sound. Emmy stood staring. Oh, I'm so glad, Laura whispered. It's all right, then. I'll be all right if I can have that. Of course you can, baby. Oh, Laura, I hurt you so. You could never hurt me too much, Beth. You can never teach me by hurting me. I just come back for more. I guess I'll never learn. I love you too much. I love you so much. They kissed each other's lips, and Beth liked the velvety softness of Laura's mouth. She could command Laura the way Charlie commanded her, but the authority fulfilled and invigorated Charlie. It only amused Beth and left her empty. Emmy stood watching them, transfixed and soundless, while Beth rocked Laura gently in her arms and whispered, We'll work it out, honey. Don't worry. And then Emmy pulled the door to very quietly, and without letting it catch, and left. She walked down the hall shivering, nervously, wondering what to do. She stared unseeing at the bulletin board in the hall, with her head full of the strange scene she had just witnessed, and the details of it so vivid that she could think of nothing else. After a little while, she heard soft voices down the hall. She turned around and saw Beth and Laura coming toward her. Beth, she said, with a humane impulse to warn them of her presence. Beth looked up. Oh, Emmy, she said, I thought you were in Bobby's room. Emmy hesitated, feeling strangely uncomfortable, and Laura started up the stairs to bed. What, Em? Said Beth. She glanced quickly at Laura. Go on up, Laura, she whispered. See you in the morning. She looked back at Emmy, and Emmy found she couldn't say it. She couldn't ask. How's Charlie? She said. Beth relaxed then and gave her a radiant smile. Wonderful, she said. I'm in love. And she went upstairs to bed, leaving Emmy confounded. She knew she would have to talk to Beth about Laura. She couldn't keep the things she had seen and heard locked inside of her. But she would wait, she decided, until the next night. Then Beth and she would be alone for the first time in months. Laura would have left for her semester vacation. So Emmy kept her peace for almost 24 hours, and then discovered, when the time came for her to speak, that she didn't know how to broach the subject. She looked at Beth with a sort of new timidity and said, dismayed to find her voice raspy, Beth? Beth? Beth looked at her. Why, Emmy, whatever is the matter? You look as if you... She stopped, wondering. Emmy, what's the matter? Well, Beth? She walked over to her, as if it were too difficult to send her words across the room, and took a deep breath. Is Laura in love with you? She asked finally. Oh, said Beth, and her face went very pale. She put her head down for a moment and said, Oh, Emmy, I know she is. I heard her say it last night. I had to tell you. Oh, Em. Beth, I won't tell. I won't ever tell, I promise. Emmy held her shoulders and watched her anxiously. Beth couldn't talk. Do you love her too? Beth lifted her head. Emmy, come sit on the couch. Listen to me. They sat down together, and Beth tried to explain what had happened to her, and she tried to be honest. Emmy listened without saying a word, watching Beth's face intently. Finally, Beth looked up at her and said, You see, Emmy, why it's been so hard? Now I'm in love with Charlie, really in love. But I can't hurt Laura any more. I just can't. I can only wait till it wears off, till she grows out of it and forgets about me, without my having to hurt her. Wouldn't it hurt her less just to tell her you don't want to do it any more? Beth played nervously with a cigarette. Yes, I guess it would, but you see, that's not it exactly. I'm not in love with her. That's what I ought to tell her, but you mean you still want her? It was as weird and wondrous to Emmy as sorcery would have been. "Yes," said Beth. She looked at Emmy with a worried frown. "Em, you must think I'm terrible." "Oh, Beth, I don't think you're terrible at all." She leaned toward her sympathetically. "I couldn't think you were terrible. We're friends, Beth. I just don't get it, that's all. Why do you want a girl when you could have a man? I mean, why does a girl want a girl? Ever? I mean, well," she laughed a little, "what is there to want?" "Oh, Emmy, I don't know how to tell you. We were both lonely. We just happened to be lonely at the same time in the same place, that's all. It was too easy. It was so good to have somebody to hold, to talk to, sort of play with and play at making love. But Laura isn't playing. She is in love. I heard her say so." "Oh, she thinks she is. She's just so young she doesn't know. These things never last." "How do you know?" "Oh, Em, when you go to a girls' boarding school, you just know. It happens all the time. You grow out of it. It doesn't last. It's just part of growing up. Didn't you ever have a crush on a girl?" Emmy searched her memory. "No," she said doubtfully. "I don't think so. Oh, once when I was about 12, I guess. No, I don't think that was really a crush." She looked at Beth. "Well, maybe not. Anyway, there were always so many boys around and they were so much more fun. Well, I mean," she hunched her shoulders. I know. It never happens to some people, and it does to others. That's all." "Beth, how do you know it won't last with Laura? I mean, some people never grow out of childish things. If this is a childish thing, how do you know?" "Oh, because Laura's a sensible girl. She's sentimental, but she's just timid. She hasn't known enough men. She's afraid of them. When she gets over that, she'll be all right. She had to be all right." "Well, I guess you ought to know, but some people go through all their lives queer." "Oh, I don't mean you, Beth. I guess that's not a very nice word." "Oh, it's just a word. What's in a word?" "Besides, you're in love with a man." "Yes, I am." "Oh, I am, Emmy, I am." "Well, how can you love two people at once, Beth?" "I can't. That's the whole trouble. I'm in love only with Charlie. But don't you see, Em? Laura can't be in love with me forever. I mean, a schoolgirl crush just doesn't last that long." "I know. I've had them. You get over them. She'll get used to the idea of dating, of having me date too, and pretty soon she'll begin to forget about it, and nobody gets hurt. Do you see?" "Yeah, if it works. Emmy, you mustn't worry. Now that she understands about Charlie, there won't be any more trouble. That was the whole trouble before." "Does she understand about him?" "Oh, yes." Beth crushed the cigarette out in a bean-bottomed ashtray. "Does she know you love him?" "She knows I need him, Em." Emmy frowned at her. "Oh, Em, believe me, I know what I'm doing." She spoke heartily in order to convince herself. "There won't be any more trouble now. We all understand each other. Everything's going to be all right, really." "Does Charlie understand about Laura?" "Oh, no," said Beth, and the idea shocked her. "He'll never know." "I hope not," Emmy said. "Well, okay, Beth, I trust you." She had never seen Beth in a situation she couldn't handle. Beth was right, for a while. She and Charlie were happy, Laura seemed to be happy, and even Mitch seemed to have deserted his books for a gay social life. He'd called Mary Lou, and they were seeing a great deal of each other. Even Bud had settled down to a steady routine. He'd given Emmy his fraternity pin, which was in the nature of a minor miracle. Bud had managed to elude every other girl he'd known and leave them unscathed, his pin still firmly attached to his old tennis sweater. But Emmy had won, and she was triumphant. She was teased, however. As Beth put it to Laura, that's just the first plateau. She's trying for the $64,000 ring. Laura laughed, and Beth went on, "She'll never make it. Not with that guy. She'd better switch categories pronto." Mary Lou said hopefully, "Maybe she'll calm down now and stop panting over him in public." And so the month went by, peaceful on the surface, but boiling dangerously just below the surface. The first week in March brought sorority initiation. Laura became a full-fledged alpha beta with a pin like Beth's, and she and Beth shared a sentimental bond that Charlie couldn't break. It eased Laura to think about it on dreary weekends when Beth and Emmy were out with Charlie and Bud and she sat at home alone and studied, for she wasn't going out very much any more. She wouldn't have it all, except when Beth insisted on it, and then she accepted a blind date only to keep peace. "You've got to go out once in a while, Lore. My God, you dated every week last fall. It looked just too damn strange if you suddenly quit for no reason." So she sighed and did as Beth told her. The nicest part of the weekend was at closing hours, when Beth came in and Emmy went to bed. Emmy usually went off discreetly, and it struck Laura as simple good luck. Beth never told her that Emmy knew. Once Laura asked, "Emmy doesn't suspect anything, does she? I mean, I was pretty temperamental a couple of times. Do you think she suspected?" And Beth laughed and mussed up her hair and said, "Laura, honey, you worry about all the wrong things." And Laura, as always, took her cue from Beth. Beth wasn't worried, so there was nothing to worry about. Beth didn't think they were doing anything wrong, so they weren't. Usually when Beth came in, she was in good humor. She wanted to tease and play and cuddle Laura, and she was easily roused. It seemed to Laura then that Beth would always come back to her, however far she wandered, that she alone could satisfy her, make her happy. But now and then Beth came in quiet and uncommunicative, simply too satisfied for more passion, and then Laura wondered. Sometimes Beth was a little drunk, and then Laura sulked at her. Beth would tickle her to make her giggle and then laugh at her pout. "Beth, you've been drinking," she would say. "Not against the law, honey. I'm of age." "That's not the point. I think it's disgusting." And she would turn her back on Beth's amusement. "Laura, forgive me," Beth would plead and laugh at her. "You smell of gin." Beth squeezed her and said, "You don't even know what gin smells like." "I do, too." "Okay, I smell of gin. I guess you don't want me around. I guess I'd better just go off and leave you alone." "No, Beth." And she turned around and caught her arm as Beth started to rise. Beth pushed her away. "Oh, but I smell of gin, remember? Laura, I don't know how you put up with me. I swear I don't know." And then Laura would have to beg her to stay and protest that she didn't care what her breath smelled like. But she did.